I'm just going to open up by introducing the panel. I'm Jeff Weiss. I'm with New York Counts 2020 and with New York Law School, here to open things up for this session. This is a Census 101 workshop on energizing the count. And the two presenters we're going to have are from CRE, and that is Tatiana Donaldson and George Shea. And I'm going to leave the program to them to conduct the rest of it. So thank you all again for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. I know we have a little bit of competition next door, but we wanted to make sure that we gave space for this conversation, recognizing that we're all coming into this work with different entry points, and to be transparent, Community Resource Exchange. We kind of came late to the party a little bit. A lot of the partners, some of you have been doing this work for the last year or so, really kind of engaging in a lot of the details, the fine tuning to get us to where we are today. I think one of the beautiful things about being a part of this effort is that we're seeing New York City and the many different types of organizations be mobilized for this effort using all of our different assets. And so as Community Resource Exchange, we're a nonprofit consulting firm primarily working with organizations around leadership, management, strategic planning, really the nuts and bolts of what makes an organization effective and impactful. And so we're certainly not the census experts. There are probably other folks in the room that might be able to claim that title. But we're here really to provide you with, again, kind of some reinforcement around this work, as well as giving you a little bit of a teaser of what we are going to be doing going forward, recognizing that this effort will need to be sustained, that it won't just be the single day pitch for all of you to be engaged. How do you think about integrating this work within your organizations? And so with that, I just wanted to lead us into some of the content with some basic introductions just to get a sense of who is in the room. And so just by a show of hands, how many of you are connected to a community, a specific community? Okay. How many of you are serving communities with immigrant populations? Okay, majority of the people in this room. How many of you are serving families with children under 5? Again, a good portion of you. The case that we want to make, and in case you haven't heard it yet, is that all of you here are critical parts of this effort, recognizing that you are the trusted messengers for your communities. You have been there, you have been alongside folks in their challenges, you have been there to guide them to resources. And so as community-based organizations, you all are best placed to actually share the importance of this work with your communities to ensure that we have a fair and accurate count. And so what's really nice about all the things that you're seeing today is that quite a bit of investment has been made in the New York kind of nonprofit sector to really be mobilized. Oops, I think this went out. You can hear me? Okay. We're a small room, so I'll just project. So we're really here to mobilize our communities to be a part of this effort. And so I think, as we've been saying, it takes repetition for us to get this message through. So today, hopefully this will be the 7th time that you've heard why it's important, why you all need to be engaged, why it's easy to access, and why it's safe to participate. And so just wanted to walk us through our goals, is to really, if you haven't heard it already, be really clear about what's at stake. We also want to kind of give you some suggestions for how you might be able to participate in this effort, to increase census participation in your communities. And lastly is really some access to tools and resources. We have an hour together, so we won't be able to get into the wide range of tools and resources that we are developing, that we are leveraging through our partnerships with others today, but definitely stay connected with us. We have a dedicated page on our website where we'll be updating it live. Okay? So hopefully we're all in the right room. So again, just to give you a very clear, crisp definition of the census, it's a process of acquiring information on the US population. It's administered by the Census Bureau, which is part of the Department of Commerce, and it takes place every 10 years. And so because of that, we really want to give you a little bit of history, and some of it has already been noted in earlier conversations, but we wanted to highlight the importance of this effort by giving you just a history at a glance, okay? And so it was said in 1790, that was when the first census was conducted. And we want to acknowledge that there's actually a very shameful history to all of this, right? And the 3/5 compromise is something that was determined by the Congress just several years before, where 3 out of every 5 enslaved person was counted as part of the effort, giving southern states a third more representation than they would if they didn't count enslaved people, but at the same time, it also didn't give them more representation than if every an enslaved person as well as free person was considered equally. And so that is the history that we're kind of entering into this work. Fast forward, another important marker is World War II and Japanese internment. This was when one of the greatest violations of federal, in terms of privacy, that the data that was collected in 1940 was actually used to determine where Japanese individuals were located to be able to identify them and put them into internment camps. This is an important piece to highlight because as a result of this, and in part, because of the gross violation of that time, a very important law was passed. Title 13 of the U.S. Code, you may not need to remember Title 13, but the important thing to know is that in 1954, this was passed to ensure that the information that is collected as part of the census is protected. And this is kind of the strongest privacy laws that are used to ensure that the data that is collected as part of this effort isn't used for any other purpose. We want to ensure that you all leave today knowing that this is a federal crime if someone actually accesses this data, and that people can be fined up to $250,000 or even face prison sentence. And so it's a very serious crime, and I'd like to let you all know that it has not been violated since that law was passed. But it's a really important detail that we want to kind of keep in our back pockets, especially as we are kind of connected to communities that are already concerned about their participation in this effort. And so in case those of us in this room, maybe we haven't been paying attention to the census, well, we were kind of brought into the conversation this year because of the citizenship question. And the citizenship question needs no explaining, but really kind of just to highlight that it was an intimidation tactic, right? And so the Supreme Court, thankfully, kind of shut this down, and it's not a part of the census survey. But the damage has been done. Right? A lot of the communities that we're trying to reach are already distrustful of the government. The census question being posed out there kind of further amplified some of those concerns. What we want to say about kind of this history at a glance is that the census is political, it has been racialized, and it's important that we participate. It is important that we ensure that every person is counted to get their fair share of resources, representation in our country. And so for that reason, we really wanted to kind of just give you some reference points when you bring back to your community to kind of further amplify the message of why we need to really pay attention to this effort coming up next year. And so Tatiana right now is just going to walk us through a couple of kind of key pieces that you may want to take with you going away. We've heard already around money, power, and respect. That's a really nice way to tie it together. We're going to give you another way of messaging. And so I'll turn it over to Tatiana here.
Thanks, George. So You've all heard a lot today that the census is important. So this is probably time number 10 approximately, but I'm just going to say it again. The census is really important. So it determines a lot of the annual allocation of federal funding, as you all have heard today, up to $675 billion. And this includes infrastructure, roads, healthcare, schools, and a lot more. So question for the room: how many of your organizations get direct federal funding or pass-through funding for your programming? Okay, all right, just a couple people in the room. So we all know that the census is important, but in 2016, based on the 2010 census, approximately how much federal funding did New York State receive? Does anyone have any guesses? Those of you who know the answer, please don't cheat.
Yeah.
Someone throw out a guess. No one? Okay, all right, I'll reveal the answer. $73 billion in federal funding just in 2016 alone, based on the 2010 census. So it determines resources. This is thank you. Ooh. Census determines resources that are allocated in funding, again, for money, for infrastructure, for roads, healthcare, schools, and so much more. The census is also important because it factors into how our rights are determined. So we heard this talked about a little bit earlier on the panel, and George has also brought it up. But, determines if states are violating the Civil Rights Act, which was passed in '64. If housing and employment or education are being, done equally. So if you think about, say we count that more than half the United States is 50% women. However, if Congress only has 10 women, there's a misrepresentation in there, right? So if we're thinking about rights and how we are proportioning society, the census is extremely important for this reason. So social justice laws also often take into account the census. And so if you think about if the African American population makes up 12%, but only comprise a few percent of university populations, this is also a gross divide between the data that we have and what's being actually proportioned. So again, time number 13, the census is important because it determines representation. So you've heard this earlier. New York currently has 27 seats in Congress, and we are one of the only states, or if not the only state, currently predicted to lose 2 seats because of potential undercount, which is very preventable. And so all of you in this room as trusted community partners, this is where we really want to rely on you to go out into your communities and really lift up the message of the census, because this loss of 2 seats is incredibly preventable. And not only does New York have 27 seats in Congress, but we also have a number of chairs and co-chairs of incredibly important committees. And so that's a lot of voting power that we hold in Congress. That's extremely important. And last but not least, the census is important because it determines redistricting. So after every census, congressional lines are redrawn. Each congressional district has to have the same amount of people, which is 700,000. And so we want to make sure that the lines are being drawn the right way and that people are being represented fairly and equally, and that schools and districts are being proportioned correctly. So George just said, that the census is power, respect, and money. I'm going to introduce you to the 4 R's. So resources, rights, representation, and redistricting. So if you think your community would retain the 4 R's better, we invite you to take them, use them, and throw them out there. I'm going to turn it back over to George to talk about the safety of the census given the online rollout and Title 13 that he recently mentioned.
Great. And so hopefully the case is made that the census is important, but we want to also just ensure that the census is also safe. And so this is just really building on my earlier point about Title 13, and that ensures that your data is not accessed by any government or court. It's not used by the FBI, IRS, CIA. No government agency has access to that. And Census Bureau employees are sworn to actually protect that data for their lifetime. And so again, we just want to re-emphasize this because we know that in our communities, there's already a lot of hesitation when it comes to this effort. And so this is an important piece for you all to kind of internalize and also figure out how to message to your own communities. I think the other piece I would just say here is that, as mentioned, this is also the first digital census. And so while that provides some opportunities, recognizing that a lot of people do have mobile phones, have access to the internet. It does create additional security concerns. And that is something that the Census Bureau has been deeply engaged in, and that there are measures to also kind of provide communities these access hubs. So as was mentioned earlier in the previous presentation, these may be spaces that you all already gather to create kind of a single access point for people to be able to go on, fill out the census forms, etc. We want to also note the partnership with New York City Public Libraries. They are a key partner in this citywide effort. They have been equipped with technology as well as staffing resources to help people walk through the census form, how to do it safely. And so if folks either don't have broadband access in their homes, or they might need some guidance in how to navigate the website, etc., New York City Public Libraries have been equipped to do that. And so again, another suggestion to you all as you think about your communities, where they're located, what are some of the challenges for them to actually complete the census survey. This is another detail that you may want to share, that they do have some availabilities there.
Can you be a little bit more specific about what equipped means? Are there people there? Do they speak languages of the community? Are there additional computers or that are dedicated for census use?
Yes.
What's going on?
Yeah, so my understanding is that there has been a huge effort to actually enlist librarians and staff people in the libraries, as well as providing additional staffing in these places during the time in which the census will be distributed and people will need to complete the forms. They will have people that will be equipped to actually answer people's questions. And so again, a lot of tools and resources are being generated by kind of all the CBOs kind of involved in this effort. There are specific ones that are created for libraries and librarian staff to be trained on. And so the training is happening right now with staff members. I believe they're also getting kind of hardware to be able to actually meet the demand. Okay. Great. And so important, safe, and now we want to just convince you it's easy. And so, as mentioned earlier, there are 4 different ways to complete the census. It could be done online, it could be done on your phone, it can be done in paper form, and then of course there's an in-person visit by a census employee. Again, we want to reiterate that we want to encourage our communities to focus on completing the census survey as soon as possible, and would encourage folks to actually do it by phone or do it online. If there are concerns about language access, there are resources that are being made available. 13 different languages for the census survey itself. There are 59 non-English kind of video and print language guides and videos available online to ensure that the diversity of our city is acknowledged and people can access the information in their own languages. We recognize that this is not all the languages. This is not every possible kind of demographic out there, but we do also just want to kind of encourage you all to see that there is actually quite a bit of effort being done in this front, particularly kind of recognizing the diversity of our city uniquely, that there are these avenues that are available. And there are, again, kind of easy that it is 10 questions. And so, and as you heard earlier, that it should only take no more than 10 minutes to complete. And so what we would like to say is that it will be, this is the form itself. Just to give you a visual of it. So it's fairly short. Again, 10 questions here. And what we like to say is that it's 10 questions, takes you 10 minutes, it determines the next 10 years. So again, kind of something that you all can internalize and repurpose as you wish for your communities, thinking about easy ways to message this so that your communities take on this effort, that it is something that will have large implications for their families, individuals within communities, and it's also something that can be done fairly quickly and fairly easily. Any questions? I'll pause there for a second. Yes.
On your presentation, I just wanted to note something.
Yeah, please.
You mentioned the Civil Rights Act. I think maybe you should put 1964. Civil Rights Act of 1964.
That's
Could you
helpful.
just,
Yes.
You got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And
Fantastic.
when you
Thank you for
talked
that.
about digitized, it would be good to put like encryption, because I have stories to some people and the importance of encryption, so that issue of safety.
Yes.
And then
And just quickly on that point, partners at the Digital Equity Lab, for instance, have done tremendous amount of work in this area, and we would want to kind of encourage you all to check out those resources as well.
yeah, just on your presentation.
Yes. Thank you.
And then the last part is when you can fill out the form in four ways.
Yeah,
In person, isn't it activate on you?
that's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, and we want to encourage folks to actually complete the census as soon as possible, right? And again, kind of recognizing that you don't want, for a lot of our communities, we don't want to have them come knocking at our door, federal employees to come. And so this is another way to just encourage folks to engage in the process sooner rather than later. Thank you for the suggestions. Yeah, appreciate that.
Are there efforts to get, what efforts would be made to have community members be hired by the census so that when a federal employee does come knock on the door, it's somebody who lives in the community and is known?
Absolutely. So so as mentioned earlier today, there are quite a number of openings for folks to actually be enlisted in this effort. And I think there has, we have a slide at the very end with a website that you all can direct people to. And yes, absolutely, it's best if we are able to identify folks in our communities to actually serve in those roles. Yeah, absolutely.
So to complete the census online,
Yes.
Do people need a code first? Do they need like a mail-in code or access information?
So my understanding is no. You can go online and complete the form. There are unique codes that are sent in by mail, but also on the back end, the Census Bureau is able to make those reconciliations. But again, I think it's by Wendy, if you want to provide some more detail on this front.
It's the cross streets of your address, and then you supply your zip code. That's how they will locate you don't need the unique code, but you just have to give your cross streets.
And if we're working with people who are homeless or in transitional housing, what do they give? Or like how can they complete the survey?
So I think the best way to think about it is to think about where they are living on census day, which is April 1st. So whether they are currently, and something that the U.S. Census Bureau has advocated is that if you are someone who are homeless or you sleep on the streets, you can provide the cross streets of where you sleep as the location of your quote-unquote address. And they also have an operation that targets specifically the homeless community. So they will have actual canvassers go out on and around Census Day to canvass locations in which they know have populations who sleep on the street to do that in-person intake. So when we say that there is an in-person option, that option is really for communities that really need it, including the communities who are homeless.
What about government employees from other countries, for example, United Nations people or people that work for foreign companies and their families? Are they counted, or how does that work?
Yes, so I think the best way to think about the census is anyone who's living in the United States on April 1st. The way to think about the census is if you're thinking, should I fill out the census? Do I have to fill out the census? If you're living in the United States on April 1st, or if you live in the United States for a majority of the year, then you should fill out a census as a U.S. resident. So you don't have, there's no status qualification. You can be an employee in a foreign company and that's located in the U.S. You should still fill out the census. Hopefully you will still be living somewhere regardless of if you're a foreign employee or not.
Hi, my group has already done an outreach we tried. Well, we have, but our first place that we tried to do it was at an elementary school, and we're in East Harlem. And the principal had a very strong reaction and said, no, you're not coming to do an outreach, because it was, in her mind, it was tied to the citizenship question. And I kept saying, oh, it wasn't allowed, but there was no amount of convincing that I could do. So I was just wondering, are there materials that, like, the fear is so great that I think no matter how many words you say, it doesn't add up to, so I just was wondering, what are some strategies?
No, absolutely, and that's real, right? And so no matter how much kind of education that we're doing, there's certainly a lot of misinformation that's already out there. And so really the encouragement there is, again, it's an ongoing effort, and we need to continue to keep the conversation going. Right, and so being able to point people to specific resources that ensure them that we hear your question, we hear the concern. You're certainly not the only ones concerned about the implications of the citizenship question and whether or not it's on the census survey. But again, it's really pointing people to credible resources, finding people that are kind of trusted messengers, again, kind of noting that all of you in this room have connections to your communities that a federal government employee doesn't. And so hearing it from you, or maybe even other partners in the community, can be important. And so a big part of this effort is really also about building partnerships across all of our different kind of institutions in a particular community. Yeah.
I think something that's really helped me speak to people about this, because I've also had friends and family concerned about the citizenship question, is really leveraging the knowledge about Title 13 and just how strict of a law it is, and how much trouble one can get in for violating it, and just kind of expounding upon all the reasons why it's super important. I think, especially I used to work at a school, thinking about all of the resources that a school needs, I think it's fair to be really direct with the principal or whomever you're connecting with and saying, if you want pencils, this is what it really boils down to. And so, I think that getting really personal with someone about the census is I think I've found the best way to do it, and the most effective way.
Sorry, one follow-up. Are there specific materials about Title 13? I mean, there's so many.
Yeah. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a lot of resources.
If I had something that was very official looking too,
Yep.
that would have been helpful, but it's
Yeah.
early in the process and I didn't have.
I'm sorry, we have one question in the back.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late. Marcel Braithwaite from the Police Athletic League. Are there some specific steps or ways that community-based organizations can be helpful in facilitating the census process for the families we serve?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think the reason why we are highlighting the roles of all your organizations here is that you do have connections that others and the government, more formal kind of official capacity in this effort, may not have. And so again, kind of even creating spaces to have a census awareness raising event where you kind of dispel some of the misconceptions of the census, maybe even kind of thinking about how to message to your particular community. So a lot of the morning's conversation was really thinking about the stories, thinking about the messages that really resonate with your community. I think when you think about federal dollars in the billions, nobody kind of really can wrap their heads around what that might mean, but really thinking about very specifically what is the impact for a single individual, a single family that you're trying to serve can be really powerful. And so some of the kind of future trainings that we'll be doing is building off of other resources that have been created in this effort, is thinking about how do we integrate census education into our existing programming in our organizations. Many of you do, say, after school programming, or maybe there's ongoing kind of services that you provide. How do you integrate just maybe even a 5-minute conversation into something that is very kind of normalized within your organization, and that in of itself can be really powerful. Let's get one more question. Yeah, please.
The census starts on what date?
So the census, you could begin filling out the census in March.
12. So why is Census Day April 1st?
So that's-
It's out in March, but everything counts in April. Could you just-
It's counted before April 1st. Yeah, so April 1st, Census Day, again, it's really just as a marker that on the census form, it says where you're living as of kind of April 1st, 2020. It's being built up, it's a little confusing, but it's built up as kind of an effort also to acknowledge that everyone by this time, we encourage you, if you haven't already completed the census, to complete it this day, because when it comes to May, that's when people are going to be coming and knocking at your doors to complete it.
Someone does it out March the 12th, and they died the 28th of March. I mean, would it still count, or what would it?
That's fair, yeah. No, and I'm not sure the details of that. However, I would encourage people to fill out the census either way. Whether or not they know that, you know. Yeah, they may not know they're going, but I think it is important for folks to realize that it's important to be counted, right? So regardless of how you got here, what neighborhoods you're from, it doesn't matter. I think the wedding analogy earlier is helpful. If you see on your seats here, we're kind of building off of a similar analogy, is that you're planning a party, and when you plan a party and people show up, you need to know, regardless of whether or not they were invited here or not, they're going to be eating your food. They're going to be using your restrooms. So being able to know some of these details is important, regardless of how you got here.
No, I'm serious. If they died before, yeah. So will it count? I'm just looking at.
I'm not
No,
sure.
I mean it would count because they filled out the census form.
Yeah, okay, we have a concrete answer here. Thank you.
There's a few different things
Please.
about the reason April 1st is just to account for, is your new lease starting on April 1st? Do you have a college-bound student, but where are they living on April 1st? In terms of people who may be giving birth or who may pass away, everything that's collected by the Census Bureau, so including that code that folks were asking about earlier, there is a back-end match of administrative records. So if they find that actually, I filled it out, but I didn't tell my sister who's living with me, and she also filled it out, they're doing a match. They're cleaning the data, which is why the count is happening through end of July. And from July to December, the Bureau is looking at all the data, checking it against administrative record and any duplicate responses or incomplete responses. So it's okay to fill it out with your best guess, and someone will handle it. And for groups that are doing advocacy work, that July to December period is also an opportunity for us to say, hey, we know this address didn't show up in the Bureau's original record, but we know that staff live in this restaurant when the restaurant isn't open. We know it's not counted as a household, but we know we serve these people, and if you get a response from this site, don't clean it, don't erase it, we know that there are people living there.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Is there a minimum amount of time that you plan to live in the United States or have to live in the United States? For example,
In order to complete the census?
In order to complete the census.
No.
And so for folks that work with refugee and asylee communities, a lot of times, folks displaced by Maria don't necessarily call New York home, but you're living here. So if you are living here on April 1st, even if you're moving on May 5th, if you're living here on April 1st, you're counted in the census.
Even if you're planning to, let's say, go back to your country.
Thank you for that. Yes, please.
Actually, I come from women organization, and we are interested to participate. How you guys help us to entry, to work with together. So we can do anything, or you need any information about that organization?
Yeah, and so we certainly invite you all to reach out. We'll be doing a series of workshops, and if there is a desire to do more intensive work with your organization, it's certainly something that we're open to discussing. So our information is here, and feel free to reach out to us.
It's also on the little card that you have.
Yeah.
No, the other one.
Yeah. Okay. So we just wanted to just get a sense of where people are.
All right, I sense the energy's a little low in here, so I want you all to wrap your burrow as hard as you possibly can. So, Brooklyn, are you in the house? Wow! I saw like someone go for it and then you stop. So, okay, let's try this. Brooklyn, are you in the house? Woo! Do you run programming in Brooklyn? All right. No, that's okay. It's all right. It's all right. If you run programming in Brooklyn also, you can rep for Brooklyn. Bronx, you either live in the Bronx or you run programming in the Bronx. That's here for the Bronx. Yeah! Woo! Yeah, thank you. Thank you. What about Manhattan? Live in Manhattan? Woo! Yeah, thank you, Manhattan. Queens, programming or live in Queens? Yeah, Queens. All right, and Staten Island? No? Crickets? We'll still cheer for you, Staten Island. Woo! All right. All right, thank you for indulging me. So basically, as you've probably heard a number of times today, New York has some of the most historically undercounted communities. And I really like the reframe of taking the language hard to count away, because that places the onus on people who, the people in the communities that we are aiming to serve. And so the most historically undercounted communities you'll see, and we'll provide the link for this map also in the resources we send out. But the most dark red are the communities that are hardest to have been historically hardest to count. And you'll see large areas of Brooklyn and Queens that have been historically undercounted.
Self-response rate.
Oh, this is the self-response rate. And so the little key is also at the bottom.
How do you know that? What are you judging the self-response rate against to assess that?
This is the 2010 data, census data, and so this is kind of how you know if a person actually responded on their own to the census.
So it's the number of people who had to have an enumerator come to it's not the people who weren't counted altogether.
It's the number of people that have counted, that have submitted their own. Yes, correct.
Yeah. So we are aiming to obviously have this a lot more yellow and even white. Here is the Bronx and Staten Island.
And you'll see here, this is the website that you can go to actually see the data from the last census count. And it was mentioned earlier that there's another website that we can also offer that will give you relatively live updates of how but how many people within your communities are actually completing.
This website will be doing that, yeah.
Is there any data on estimating people who are missed altogether? Because this is based on eventually responded either within the enumerator.
I don't have that data, but
yeah, the Census Bureau does like sort of a self-analysis at the end of each survey, and they put out a report of the last census, so they know pretty well because of what Winnie and Amy were saying earlier, like based on other administrative data, how well they did. So we know that in the 2010 census, for example, the white population were the only group to be overcounted in the census. Everyone else was undercounted. And so we know pretty well who was missed and by how much from the census.
All right. So we've talked about historically undercounted communities, and some barriers to a complete count are some things that we've brought up that have been brought up today, but also we brought up in conversation in this session. So not understanding the importance of the census is a big one. I've spoken to people who are like, well, so what's the point? Like, I don't, why do I need this? And it's like, I don't know, do you want your trains to run on time? Do you want to have good roads? So I think really finding, as I said before, that reason to connect with someone about why it's important for them to take just 10 minutes of their day. I think some of us spend more time on social media than that, and in an hour. So even like small things like that about how easy it is to do. The new online rollout, I know we talked about this in a safety aspect, but I think there are going to be large portions of the population that are aging that might not be as comfortable with computers, which again, New York Public Libraries will be able to help. You can call. There are ways to get around this, but I think that it's definitely going to be a huge barrier, that and the fact that it's 20% that don't have internet access in their homes. So just thinking about how to really reach those populations. And if you think that in your communities you do have those populations, making a plan for how you're going to either bring people into your organizations to help them take the census, or directing them to the library.
Yes, I wanted to add that during Gail Brewer's rollout in June, the Vice President of Performance and Analysis was there, and she made arrangements for the 189 NYCHA developments that have management offices to use their kiosk. So the residents can go down to the management office and do the digital census, and somebody will be there. So be sure to share that with everybody. So you're talking about 401,000 people.
That's awesome, thank you. I'll just repeat, she said that NYCHA offices that have admin offices, if I'm correct, and will be, residents can come down and use the computers to take the census there. I'm gonna get through this and then we'll take a couple more questions. So informal complex living arrangements, I think that New York is probably one of the biggest renter populations in the country, and so that's a huge barrier. We also have people living in basements and garages, and sleeping in restaurants that they may work in overnight, the homeless population. And so thinking about how those folks are counted in a city as big as ours, and with so many different complex living arrangements is a huge barrier. And I encourage you to speak to the folks that you are working directly with, and saying, like, even if you are living in so-and-so's basement and you think that they might count you, like, make sure that you're counted. And then the assumption that the census is going to take a long time. I think that, like, before I started getting into this work, I heard the word census, and it's like, sounds like a very adult thing, and it's a form you fill out. But as we said before, 10 minutes, 10 questions for the next 10 years. And so, like, big fan of 10, 10, 10, and marketing it that way, and showing just how easy and how long it doesn't take. I will add the caveat that the more people you have living in your household, the slightly longer it will take. But, like, as a general rule of thumb, just say 10, 10, 10, and people will at least buy in a little bit more. And then distrust in the government, which is a conversation we've been having and will continue to have. And I think even before the citizenship question arose, there's a lot of distrust in government and the way that our information is used, especially with hackings in elections. And I've gotten questions about whether or not the online format will be hacked into. And so I think there is distrust in government, distrust in the technology, and so again, just working to dispel. I think we hope, but we can never be 100% sure that nothing like this will ever happen. But I think that if we're just as trusted community members, talking to people one-on-one to try and dispel this misinformation, and also saying, like, I'm taking the census, I'm in this with you, to hopefully, like, add that little piece of personal touch. And last but not least, language and literacy barriers. As George mentioned, the census will be available online in 13 languages, and then there will be online guides in 59 other languages. But there are folks who don't have the reading levels to be able to complete this, and don't have or like don't fit into those 59 languages. We're a very diverse city and country at this point, and so thinking about how to reach those folks, and if you know that you work with populations that may fit any one of these, I encourage you to really do the outreach, to speak to folks one-on-one, to try and figure out what they need. Again, that personal touch, that personal connection, to help get everyone counted as easily as possible.
The three of us are with New York Public Library for the adult learning centers with English and literacy. Are you? And we are actually charged with creating some curriculum. Are you aware of any curriculum that currently exists that we can steal from?
There are resources we can share with you, but Amy, did you?
So Scholastic used to be a national partner with the Bureau in previous census cycles. One of the big changes in 2020 is that they're no longer a partner. So while they were developing materials for an elementary-facing audience, a lot of the materials actually lend themselves well to English language learners because it's simple English language terminology, and numeracy lessons and basic civic lessons as well about like where do fire departments go, where do busways go. So if you look on Scholastic's site, if you just Google Scholastic Census 2010, they publish those materials for free, understanding that they've not been given the okay this go around to publish new materials. Scholastic, is that, I'm not sure. If you Google Scholastic and Census.
There is another group working on it. I know there's another group working on a curriculum, and I'll check my email because it was given to me to review, and I haven't done it. So, but I'll look back to the email.
Yeah.
There's somebody working on it for 2020.
Yeah. And if you wanted to reach out you can email it to us and we'll send it to all the people who are
It's
seeking.
not being distributed yet.
Oh, okay. Progress.
Development.
Fantastic.
Question on the public library, are they getting more staffing? Are the hours going to be extended? Is there any information about that?
Maybe the folks from the public library can answer that a little bit better, but
We cannot.
okay.
Okay.
So this is still being developed within the library system, so it's not available to the public yet, how we're reaching out more effectively for our patrons. We're from the Adult Learning Center, so we're trying to reach English language learners and lower literacy students. And we have a lot of school outreach programs, so again, it's still being developed, so it's not ready to roll out for the public.
10 hours,
We don't know yet, yeah.
And what I know is that there will be increased staffing capacity, so that I can definitely say yes to.
Okay. Okay. And so I know it's been a long day with a lot of information. And so we just wanted to kind of just name a couple of potential next steps as you're thinking about taking on this work. We want to just highlight that you all are already much further along than a lot of other folks. We're hoping that we can enlist even more partners in this work. I was kind of really energized to see that we have such diversity in the room today. I was sitting at a table with someone from Lyft, somebody from a teachers union, and somebody from a church. And so it's amazing to see kind of how many different types of organizations and different kind of trusted messengers that are being kind of enlisted and deployed as part of this effort. And so we want to encourage you as well as your colleagues to continue attending trainings. As we're hearing, a lot of things are evolving in real time. There's a lot of resources certainly that are being dedicated to this year's the 2020 census. However, it's a lot of moving pieces. And so tools and resources are being developed right now that other people can access. There can be all kinds of gatherings, awareness raising events, as well as kind of capacity building trainings that will be happening in the coming weeks and months. So we just kind of encourage you all to continue to kind of keep your eye out for that. And hopefully that will allow you to also host your own census awareness event, recognizing that you all are already kind of accessing engaging and interacting with your communities in particular ways. So how can you think about doing something in addition to what you're already doing in your communities? We want to kind of encourage you to think about how you might be able to integrate this into your existing programming. We know that with a lot of community-based organizations, you're already operating with very limited staffing, limited resources. So what are some of the lighter lifts? What are the easier ways that you might begin thinking about integrating census education and awareness into your programming? And even coming up with a get out the count plan. Sometimes saying a plan feels a little intimidating to kind of put something on paper and to really kind of develop a full-fledged approach. But really just thinking about how can your organization participate in this effort? What are some immediate actions that you can commit to? And then for those of you that are kind of really thinking about how you might be able to mobilize community members, how can you, as well as others in your communities, maybe you have access to a volunteer network, maybe you have access to other kind of connections to people within your community that was raised earlier. How can folks be kind of educated to do phone banking, canvassing, texting, all of the tools that were mentioned earlier? I think what's super exciting about the census mobilization effort is that we are investing into New York City's civic infrastructure. We have elections coming up as well, thinking about how you can actually deploy people and get them trained on some of these key skills can actually be very transferable for other kind of civic engagement activities for the future. Right? And so even thinking about this beyond the census, this is something that is incredibly important for your communities and an opportunity really to be kind of equipping people with tools and resource skills that they can use in the future.
So if we say we wanted to do text banking, are there resources? They mentioned like software and all before, but it's one thing to know about text banking software, it's another to have it filled with text numbers and have scripts, and that's something I don't have access to.
Yes, so what we want to encourage is that there's a very easy way to plug into the outreach efforts, and that is to actually joining your neighborhood organizing census committee. These are called NOCs. And we want to encourage you to consider whether or not that's a place in which you might be able to plug in with your organization or with your kind of volunteer base. These are essentially community members that are part of a specific census tract, and they will be kind of given resources from the city in order to do some of the canvassing, the texting, the phone banking. As a citywide partner, CRE is also in the future going to be kind of doing some of those kind of tactical skill-based trainings for people either participating in NOCs or organizations that have an interest in doing this. So more to come in terms of trainings and resources available.
Do you have an idea of timing? I know it's fluid and all, but I think like Census 2020, the teaching.
Yeah.
But waiting for the next step.
Yeah, so at least for us, and I know that other organizations are thinking about doing the same, and it's certainly going to take many of us to get this out there. We're thinking about January. Okay. Maybe in the back, very back.
I just had a question about who's allowed to come alongside a family or a parent, let's say, and help them fill out the census, because I know someone mentioned in the other room Title 13, I'm not sure what that is, but that only Census Bureau workers are allowed to do certain work, and I'm just wondering if we can talk about that line, like, and where that's drawn.
Yeah, can you clarify? So are you speaking to kind of who can assist a family in completing the census form? Yeah, so Title 13 is the protection of the data. So I think what you're speaking to is really kind of who can come alongside a family, right, to actually complete. I think that's really kind of anyone can do that. We certainly believe that you all, as community-based organizations and representatives of your communities or people that are embedded within your communities, that you're the closest and most connected to folks. And Jeff?
It's also important in a household that if there are non-related people or temporary people living there for most of the year, they need to be included in the form as well. This is similar to when you vote. You can bring somebody you know into the voting booth with you. A board of elections person can help you, but a sibling, a parent, a relative, a friend can. But the key thing is everybody in a household needs to be counted and can do that as a group effort. The confidentiality applies to Census Bureau workers who can ask you questions and write it down.
So just trying to avoid violating personal privacy and confidentiality, something that everybody sort of helps you maintain and helps you.
Aside from volunteers, is there a clearinghouse or some other method that organizations, nonprofits are actually hiring people? We're not talking about the census, U.S. Census, but organizations. For example, we have students who are looking for work.
Yeah.
Or kids graduating from college, right?
Yes. Yes. So my understanding is yes, a lot of nonprofit organizations, particularly ones that are going to be receiving funding from the city to do this work, will need additional hands. I think part of the application process was actually to name kind of staffing resources that you're going to make available to actually deliver on the work. And so the short answer is yes, and I believe that there are other kind of existing partnerships, for instance with CUNY, where I think I forget the exact number, but a number of kind of CUNY fellows are also coming alongside the effort to participate and help CBOs that are doing this work. Yes, so the NOCs are actually going to be managed by the New York City Census 2020 kind of team. The exact structure of it, I believe, is also in development, and will kind of be resolved shortly.
In Queens, we already have a complete count committee.
Yes.
With the Borough President's Office.
Yes.
And the subcommittees we're going by community boards.
Yes.
So it's usually like two
Yes.
community boards within a subcommittee.
Yeah, and that's helpful to note because the complete count committees, I believe each borough has one, or I think most of them do at this point. And that is separate than the actual NOCs. So the NOCs are kind of by census tract, whereas the community board is more about a particular, a larger geographic scope.
Just a quick note about the NOCs. I know some of them are headed by individual kind of community members that have shown interest in investment in leading these. Some of them are headed by CBOs in the area, and some of them are also then headed by the city. So that's just.
So for how to participate in a NOC? Yes, we'll send the link over to you all as well as a follow-up. And so I'm hearing some clapping on the other side. So we also just wanted to lastly say there are ways for you to consider either applying yourselves or sharing this link with other interested folks to participate in the Census Bureau efforts. And so just as a way of closing, I'm going to turn over to my colleague.
All right, so today we've learned the census is important, safe, and easy. And when I say NYC, I want you guys to say count on me. So I'm the energy person. Let's try this one last time for me. NYC.
Count on me.
NYC.
Count on me.
NYC.
Count on me.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you.